Story begins with a dark energon meteor crash landing, or at least entering Earth's orbit first, before crash landing. We would then pan over to multiple sources where the Autobots would pick this up, with Ratchet even stating this to Optimus. Keep in mind, Bulkhead, RC, and Bumblebee would be out with their humans, just kind of hanging out and having a good time. And so this is where Ratchet actually is monitoring the Dark Energon meteor and realizes that something sentient was within it. It's got a spark beat, if you will. And so this is where Optimus states that, well, they could investigate it. And so he and Ratchet are the ones to go and investigate the coordinates of this Dark Energon meteor, but they are cautious because, again, the amount of it is very interesting. And, well, on the Decepticon warship, which the meteor would have passed by, then, yeah, obviously the Decepticons are the first to notice this, but this is where Soundwave also notes there's a spark beat as well. Then we would pan over to the Harbinger, where we actually get Starscream. Yeah, Starscream actually is like, you know what? Clothes can wait. I can just go and investigate this. And so Starscream is also the one to immediately fly off to the coordinates, because I would probably say they're like in a decent or reasonable range within each other, so he just kind of flies there. So Optimus and Ratchet actually are the first to encounter Thunderwing, who is in the Dark Energon meteor, but upon sensing Optimus, he wakes up like almost immediately and even bursts out of this Dark Energon meteor. Now keep in mind, unlike the original first fight, I'm going to have Thunderwing be at full strength here, and he's actually able to fight against Optimus kind of like his usual self. However, there's a problem. All this dark energon surrounding them does weaken Optimus and seems to be empowering Thunderwing. Optimus is blasting him in his face, his rear, his torso, everything, right? Even the balls. I mean, come on, dude's trying everything possible, but Thunderwing is simply too powerful. And then he actually flies up and utilizes a Dark Energon Fire Blast and tries to roast Optimus. Optimus is able to transform and get out of the way of it just in the nick of time, like just barely on this one. And so Optimus actually finds a clearing, but again, keep in mind, he is fatigued and tired from this dark energon poisoning, and does manage to land a blast on Thunderwing, causing him to yell out in pain. However, Thunderwing slams right down and causes a massive shockwave to ripple through the battlefield, and Optimus gets buried beneath tons, and I mean tons of rubble, until Thunderwing then lets out another shockwave that actually begins to damage Optimus even with that rubble on him. And Ratchet is simply like, oh no. We then pan over to the distortion world, where two beings, a husband and wife, are just looking through all the nexus points in reality. And this is where we see the Mistress of Flame walk over to her husband, and she says, honey, you're going to want to see this. To which Giratina is looking through other points in realities, making sure everything's fine. And he says, what is it, dear? And so Mistress of Flame, or Flame, actually states that, I think you'll love this. Thunderwing is back, and he turns around to her almost excitedly, and he's like, no, you're lying. There's no way. He shouldn't even be alive at this point. What? He's really alive? And this is where she simply shows him the point in reality that Thunderwing has finally emerged. And she says, you want to go out and get him, don't you? Just all having a good old time and a great fight, don't you? And he's like, yes, 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 I love you so much. And so he actually grabs her, and they fly through this point in reality, or at least, their nexus point, if you will. And so Optimus is at the edge of dying at this point, and Ratchet can't think of anything to do, because again, keep in mind, Ratchet's not even a long-range fighter. He doesn't even have like any blasters or anything, which again is actually like a pretty big crutch for a medical officer. And well, Thunderwing's about to finish him. Bro actually charges up his cannons and is prepared to fire on Optimus, about to straight up just nuke this man with a dark energon blast. However, this is where a dark portal opens in front of him, And Thunderwing looks in absolute horror as a dark pulse comes right through, sending him flying and tumbling through a mountain, or at least one of the few mountain ranges that they're at. And Thunderwing is like, no, no, you shouldn't be here. Not now, not when I'm so close. And this is where Giratina emerges through the portal in his more blackish, demonic looking form. I mean, this looks straight up evil to me, but I love it as well. And so, as he states, time to have some fun, and charges at Giratina, or charges at Thunderwing, excuse me, Mistress of Flame actually comes out and looks down at Optimus, and he's like, who are you? And this is where the Mistress of Flame simply states, so this is the Prime that Primus chosen. Well, I've seen better over the years, but you definitely look like you got some potential. And this is where Ratchet simply is able to finally come down with Giratina distracting Thunderwing, and he asks, who are you? And he says, she states that now is not the time. Right now, let's get your fallen comrade up and get him out of here. And this is where she and Ratchet actually get to a safer distance with Optimus. Meanwhile, Thunderwing tries his Dark Energon fire on Giratina. However, Giratina actually not only absorbs the flame, but simply stops it, converts it into a more positive energy, or kind of like the fire or aura sphere you see here, and then simply blasts it right back at Thunderwing, causing him to fall back and starts having parts falling off of him. So basically, Thunderwing's getting absolutely wrecked at this moment. And this is where Thunderwing simply states, you of all the beings, I thought you didn't interfere in Prime endeavors. This is not up to you to decide. His fate is to die here and now. To which Giratina states, may I remind you that my goal, or me and my wife's goal, are to simply make sure the dynasty of Primes continue. You trying to end that line is not going to happen. And so as Giratina charges, this is where he's actually shot in the back by a blast. It causes him to budge, but it doesn't really cause any major damage or injuries to him. So he's kind of like, okay, what the heck was that? And he looks up to see the Decepticon warship. And he's like, well, seems like that's my cue to go. Well, Thunderwing, I hope you enjoyed your annual beating. I will be seeing you again very soon. And so, he regroups with his mistress and Ratchet, and they all both leave through the ground bridge. Meanwhile, Thunderwing asks Megatron for help, and he's, I would probably say, practically begging for it. He states, help me, and I will even serve you, Cybertronian. And this is where Megatron's like, interesting. But you will also tell me everything you know, and I will see to it that you will complete whatever goal you need, so long as it's within my parameters. To which he says, anything, just help me, and I will do what you ask. So, Thunderwing is taken to the Decepticon warship to be repaired. However, we would then go back to the Autobot base. And, well, Team Prime ultimately does arrive like in the original, and they're actually confused. The kids are even more confused, with Miko actually admiring Giratina, but this is where they're looking like, wait a minute, what the heck happened to Optimus? He was just fine, right? What the heck? And keep in mind, if you guys are wondering what episode this kind of takes place in, this does take place instead of Operation Bumblebee. So that episode is completely tweaked and changed entirely. By the way, if you're wondering where Starscream was, he was kind of watching in the back, and he kind of just dips once the Decepticon warship does come into view. And so, the Mistress of Flame does tell them not to be alarmed, and does introduce herself and her husband, Giratina. Now, you might ask yourselves, how did this happen? And Bulkhead is pretty much curious as well on how did they come to be? Like, why are they actually here? And this is where Mistress of Flame kind of treats them like children in a way, and tells them to gather around so that she can tell them a story. And so, we would head back to the past. Keep in mind, Optimus is on life support at this point, but hey, it is what it is. But right now, she does explain. The 13 original Primes were in a battle with Unicron, and so they thought they were winning. They had the upper hand on them during the war. Everything seemed like it was going great. That is, at least until Megatronus had betrayed them, double-crossed him, chose to serve Unicron in hopes of sparing himself from the inevitable doom, as he thought they could never beat Unicron at any given point. So Alchemist Prime, understanding that the dynasty of the Primes was under threat, actually utilized a all-consuming supernova to actually create the Mistress of Flame. But Giratina was also made, created from a black hole that had an abnormal amount of antimatter, and thus created them. They were meant to safeguard the Primes and their dynasty over the years. However, Unicron saw this and, well, decided to make his own from his own metallic blood, and, well, metal and blood, or metal and dark energon, and thus created Thunderwing, a being of raw power and destruction. And RC simply asks, okay, that explains a lot, but why haven't you guys appeared during the war? We could have used guys or used beings of your unimaginable power for the Autobots. And Giratina simply states that they were actually fighting Thunderwing in a dimension known as the Distortion Realm, and thus lost him in there and have been searching for him ever since. To which Ratchet says, okay, that ultimately does check out, but how can we actually help Optimus so that this doesn't happen to him again? And to which Mistress of Flame does look at Optimus, and she kind of looks at him like, I guess you could say almost disappointed, but she does state she knows a way for them to pretty much fix up Optimus. And so this is where we get the rest of the episode of Operation Bumblebee, where we actually see Breakdown and Knockout trying to chip away at the Forge of Solus Prime. So the Mistress of Flame actually leads this mission along with Bumblebee, Bulkhead, and RC. Bulkhead goes, after Breakdown, just like in the original, and, well, Knockout is taken on by RC and Bumblebee. However, the Mistress of Flame simply utilizes her hammer and simply smashes the shield generator, causing Knockout to look in absolute disbelief and fear as he jumps back. However, this is where Megatron shows up, and like in the original, or kind of unlike the original, he tries to go for the Forge. However, the Mistress of Flame steps in the way, telling him, I wouldn't try that if I were you. But Megatron, being Megatron, takes out his blade and states, you will not defy me, creation of Alchemist, and simply lunges at her. So this is where the Mistress of Flame simply says, feel the power of the sun, and simply launches a devastating beam at Megatron that leaves him melted, mangled, and deformed. Dang it, Megatron, you should have heard that warning, should have heeded the warning. But now look at you, back in the same position as you were last time. So the Autobots get the Forge while the Decepticons had to retreat with Megatron. But this is where Thunderwing walks over to him in the medical bay and states, I can return the favor easily. And Megatron simply asks, what do you have in mind? Not even Knockout could fix me in this state, so I'll doubt you would actually be able to do so. And to which Thunderwing simply laughs and states, you know very little of the power of Unicron. Dark Energon is not the only thing that could give you power. And so Thunderwing reaches into, I guess you could say, his own chest, pulls out a strange substance, to which he says, this is Unutrium. Dark Unutrium, if you will. A metal made out of the darkest parts of Unicron. And so he places it in Megatron's chest. Back at the Autobot base, Mistress of Flame, Bumblebee, RC, and Bulkhead all simply return and give the Forge over. To which this is where she simply states to Ratchet, place this on Optimus and he will be reborn stronger than what he was before. And keep in mind, Ratchet and Giratina have basically been prolonging Optimus's lifespan through basically both natural and supernatural means. So Ratchet brings the Forge over to Optimus, and, well, the Forge resonates with him, begins to glow and begins to essentially operate very differently. Meanwhile, the black energon or the Unutrium, or the dark Unutrium that was given to Megatron reacts with his dark energon spark. And so Megatron is not only reborn stronger than what it was before, but he's reformatted into Galvatron. Meanwhile, Optimus actually feels the surge of energy course through him, and he is also reborn into his 2.0 body. And so this is where both of them simply walk towards their causes and simply states, Autobots, Decepticons, a new level of war has simply begun, and we must do our very best to defeat the Decepticons and annihilate the Autobots.